"The granaries will pass into Lady Lavinia's management at once," Duke Percival Hawthorne announced. "Until the accusations against my wife are resolved, Duchess Frances will exercise no authority over another bushel of Ashbourne grain." The great hall fell silent. Nearly 100 people stood beneath the carved oak rafters: tenant farmers, millers, village elders, estate officers, and several county gentlemen whose support Percival needed for Parliament. At the long council table sat Lady Lavinia Crowe, his widowed cousin, dressed in dark green silk. A silver brooch, shaped like a sheaf of wheat, gleamed above her heart. Before her lay 6 brass keys. Frances recognized every one. She had commissioned them when the first granary was rebuilt 6 years earlier. Each handle bore the mark of its district: a sheaf, a wheel, an oak leaf, a bell, a river, and a crown. They had hung from Frances's waist that morning. Now Percival had placed them before a woman who had lived at Ashbourne for less than a month. "The transfer is temporary," Percival continued. "Lady Lavinia will conduct an independent review of the winter stores." Frances looked at the document beside his hand. "My marriage settlement gives management of those granaries to me unless a court establishes misconduct." A few gentlemen shifted uneasily. Percival's jaw tightened. "Evidence of misconduct has already been presented." "Presented by whom?" "That is not the question before this council." "It is the only question that matters." Lavinia rose with an expression of practiced concern. "No one denies how hard you have worked, dear Frances, but several villages have reported bread shortages while your warehouses remain locked. Grain was meant to feed people, not to become an instrument of fear." Frances turned toward her. "How many people live in the Eastern District?" Lavinia's sympathetic smile faltered. "How many sacks does Belcross consume in 1 week?" Frances continued. "Which granary has a damp northern wall? How much seed grain must remain untouched if Ashbourne is to plant in March?" A flush rose beneath Lavinia's powder. Percival struck the table with his palm. "Enough." Frances looked at the husband who had once praised the very system he now condemned. During their first winter at Ashbourne, he had stood beside her in a freezing warehouse while she calculated how much wheat each village needed. He had called the rebuilt granaries her finest gift to the estate, but the dukedom had changed him. After his elder brother's death, admiration had slowly become resentment. Every farmer who sought Frances's judgment seemed, to Percival, another man questioning his authority. Then Lavinia had arrived from London with political connections, ready money, and the habit of agreeing with him before he finished speaking. The reserves prevented the price of bread from rising after the failed barley harvest, Frances said. Every district should still hold 12 weeks of emergency wheat. "Should?" Percival repeated. "Then you admit you cannot account for it." "I accounted for every sack 4 days ago. Since then, Mr. Vale has denied me entry to 2 warehouses." At the side of the hall, Steward Ambrose Vale remained perfectly still. Frances faced him. "Where was the Western Reserve moved last Tuesday?" Ambrose folded his hands behind his back. "No Western Reserve was moved, Your Grace." "Then you will have no objection to opening the Crown Granary before these witnesses." Lavinia intervened quickly. "The council did not gather to indulge another of your inspections." "No," Frances said. "It gathered so my husband could condemn me without conducting one." Percival seized a ledger page and pushed it across the table. 3 transfers bear your authorization. Grain left the Western District while families waited for flour. Frances studied the signature. The handwriting resembled hers, but the final stroke curved upward. Frances had always drawn it down through the last letter, a habit learned while keeping her father's accounts. Percival had received hundreds of letters from her. He should have recognized the difference. "When did you first see this?" she asked. "Yesterday. And you questioned Mr. Vale?" He supplied the record. "Did you question the wagon drivers?" "No." "Did you inspect the stores?" "My steward assured me." "Did you inspect them?" His silence answered her. Frances felt something inside her settle. Percival had not been forced into this judgment. He had been offered an accusation that removed an inconvenient wife and protected whatever bargain he had made with Lavinia. He had chosen not to look beyond it. Frances lifted the page. This signature was forged. A murmur passed through the hall. Ambrose stepped forward. "The ink, seal, and handwriting have already been examined. By someone employed by Lady Lavinia, by a respectable clerk." "Then bring him here." Percival took the page from Frances. "You will have an opportunity to answer these allegations before the magistrate. Until then, Lady Lavinia will hold the keys." He gathered the brass ring and placed it in Lavinia's waiting hand. The keys struck one another with a soft metallic sound. Frances looked at them, then at Percival. "Open the granaries before sunset. This council is concluded. If the stores contain what my inventory records, I will submit to an independent audit." Lavinia's fingers closed around the keys. "And if they do not?" she asked. Frances held her gaze. "Then Ashbourne has a greater problem than the woman you intend to blame." Percival motioned toward two constables. "You will leave the chamber." Frances walked before they could touch her. Near the doors stood 12-year-old Samuel Pike, the lower miller's son. Pale grit clung to his sleeves and fingertips. At first, Frances mistook it for coarse flour. Then she noticed the tiny fragments of stone. She paused. "Where did that come from?" Samuel glanced toward Ambrose. "A sack delivered to father this afternoon." "From which granary?" "The men said it came from one of your wagons." Frances lowered her voice. "Did your father grind it?" Samuel shook his head. "He cut the first sack and sent me to find you." Then Mr. Vale's men ordered everyone out of the mill. One constable opened the hall doors. Frances stepped into the courtyard without another word. If she challenged Ambrose now, he would have time to remove whatever Samuel had seen. Behind her, Percival continued speaking to his political guests. He did not follow. Frances waited until the courtyard gates hid her from the hall. Then she took the narrow servants' path toward the village. Before midnight, the church bell rang 3 slow strokes, the miller's signal that no flour was available for the morning bread. Frances found Samuel waiting near the river. He led her through the reeds to an abandoned mill whose broken wheel groaned in the current. Inside, a dozen laborers surrounded a wagon bearing Ashbourne's mark. Thomas Pike cut open the nearest sack. Sand poured across the floor. No one spoke. He opened a second sack. More sand struck the boards. The third contained rotten wheat concealed beneath a shallow layer of clean grain. A black crown had been stamped across the sackcloth. Frances knelt and examined it. "This is condemned army stock," she said. "It should never have entered an Ashbourne warehouse." A crash sounded from the rear office. Frances seized a lantern and ran toward it. Behind an overturned desk lay Elias Ward, Ambrose's junior warehouse clerk. Blood soaked one side of his shirt. She knelt beside him. "Who did this?" Elias caught her wrist and pushed a folded account page into her hand. False weights filled the columns. Beside them were payments to wagon drivers and unfamiliar warehouses. At the bottom appeared a list of shipments scheduled to leave Ashbourne before dawn. Every order bore Frances's forged initials, all but the final one. The authority releasing the Crown Reserve carried Percival's genuine signature. He thought he signed a campaign loan. Elias whispered. Lady Crowe told Mr. Vale that his grace no longer reads anything once he sees the figure he wants. Hooves thundered outside. The laborers scattered from the windows. Through a gap in the warped boards, Frances saw Ambrose dismount with 4 armed men. One carried a torch. 2 others began pouring lamp oil across the wagon and the mill entrance. Ambrose pointed toward the building. "Burn the false grain," he ordered. "When the Duchess is found beside it, no one will question who stole Ashbourne's harvest." Frances lowered the lantern. "Take Elias through the rear door," she told Thomas Pike. "Use the river path." Thomas glanced toward the windows. Vale's men are already behind the mill. The first torch struck the wagon. Flames raced across the oil-soaked boards. Smoke rolled toward the rafters as Ambrose's men blocked the front entrance. Frances looked around the abandoned mill. The main water wheel no longer turned, but its old emergency sluice remained beneath the loading platform. Opening it would flood the lower floor and extinguish part of the fire. The release chain hung beside the upper grain chute. "Samuel, climb to the loft," she ordered. "Pull the chain when I call." The boy scrambled up the ladder while Thomas and 2 laborers lifted Elias onto a wooden flower door. Frances slipped the account page inside her bodice and joined them. A pistol ball tore through the wall. "Now, Samuel." The chain rattled overhead. Nothing happened. "It is stuck," Samuel shouted. Frances seized an iron hook and struck the rusted catch beneath the chute. Once, twice, the mechanism broke loose. River water surged through the lower channel, sweeping burning timber away from the rear passage. The sudden current knocked Frances against the wall, but Thomas caught her before she fell. "Move!" They pushed Elias across the flooded floor and through the loading hatch. Samuel jumped down behind them seconds before the roof above the wagon collapsed. Outside, smoke concealed the riverbank. The laborers carried Elias into the reeds, while Frances led them toward the chapel. They had nearly reached the trees when Ambrose's voice cut through the darkness. "Find the Duchess!" A shot struck the trunk beside Frances. Thomas shoved her down the slope. They slid through mud and shallow water until the reeds hid them from the riders. Samuel knew a drainage path that ran behind the village cottages, allowing them to reach the chapel unseen. Reverend Thomas Hale opened the side door. "What happened?" "Ambrose Vale tried to burn us with the false grain," Frances said. "Elias needs a physician." The Reverend cleared the vestry table while Thomas examined the wound. "The ball passed through," he said, "but he has lost too much blood." "I can fetch Dr. Mercer," Samuel offered. Frances shook her head. "Vale's men will watch the main road. I know the sheep path behind Belcross." Before she could object, Samuel disappeared through the vestry door. Elias stirred as Reverend Hale cut away his blood-stained sleeve. "The wagons leaving tonight are not carrying all the stolen wheat," he whispered. "Most of it has already been moved." "Where?" "I never saw the destination. Only a warehouse code, a crown above the number 7. Ashbourne had 6 granaries. There was no 7th. Elias gripped Frances's wrist. "Lady Crowe needs the estate to fail its military contract. The Crown will impose penalties. The creditors will demand payment, and Ashbourne will be forced to sell land. Who intends to buy it? Crowe Agricultural Holdings. Ambrose's brother is listed as director, but the money belongs to Lady Lavinia." The plan became clear. Lavinia was not merely stealing grain. She intended to create a shortage, bankrupt Ashbourne, and purchase its farmland through a company no one publicly connected to her. "And the papers carrying my name? They make you responsible for every missing sack." Hooves sounded outside. Reverend Hale extinguished the nave candles. Thomas and the laborers carried Elias behind the altar while Frances remained near the chapel doors. If they searched the building, hiding would only trap everyone inside. A fist struck the wood. "Open in the Duke's name." Frances opened the door. Percival stood on the chapel steps with 3 constables. Ambrose waited behind him, one sleeve singed, his expression carefully composed. For one unguarded moment, relief crossed Percival's face when he saw Frances alive. Then Ambrose spoke. The abandoned mill was filled with stolen army grain. The wagon orders carried Her Grace's initials, and witnesses saw her enter before the fire began. Frances looked at Percival. Did those witnesses also see Mr. Vale pour oil across the doors? "I found him trying to save the building," Percival replied. "You found him where he arranged to be seen." Ambrose produced a scorched transfer order. This was recovered outside the mill. Frances recognized the forged curve at the end of her name. Percival held out his hand. "You will answer this before the magistrate. You still have not inspected a single granary. This is no longer about an inventory. A crown-marked wagon burned tonight, and your authorization was found beside it." "My forged authorization." The constables moved toward her. Frances did not resist. Instead, she studied Ambrose's boots. Wet sand covered the leather, but beneath it ran a streak of vivid blue paint. Only one Ashbourne warehouse had blue doors. The Crown Granary, the storehouse Lavinia had claimed, remained sealed. Frances looked directly at Percival. "Before you arrest me, ask Mr. Vale why he entered the Crown Granary tonight." Ambrose glanced down at his boots. Percival saw the movement. Then a gunshot exploded from inside the chapel. The gunshot shattered a lamp beside the altar. Percival pushed past Frances and entered the chapel. One of Ambrose's men stood in the vestry doorway with a smoking pistol, aiming toward the place where Elias lay hidden. Thomas Pike struck the gunman with a wooden bench before he could fire again. The constables dragged him to the floor. Reverend Hale pulled the blood-stained cloak away from Elias. "This man entered through the rear window," he said. "He was searching the vestry when we stopped him. Ambrose remained near the chapel doors. I sent no one inside." "Then why was he trying to kill your warehouse clerk?" Frances asked. Percival stared at the wounded man. "Who is he?" "Elias Ward," Ambrose answered. "A clerk dismissed for stealing estate records." Elias struggled upright. "I discovered Mr. Vale was replacing Ashbourne wheat with sand and condemned army grain." "A desperate lie," Ambrose said. Frances removed the folded account page from her bodice. "This records the false weights, secret payments, and shipments leaving Ashbourne tonight." Percival reached for it, but Frances held it back. "I will surrender the complete page to an independent magistrate." His expression hardened. "You still believe I would conceal evidence? You condemned me before examining the granaries. I no longer know what you are willing to ignore." The words silenced him. Frances unfolded only the bottom of the page and revealed the final authorization. Percival recognized his own signature. "I signed a campaign loan," he said. "You signed an order releasing the Crown Reserve." Ambrose stepped forward. "Lady Lavinia may have attached the wrong page by mistake." Percival looked down at the blue paint on the steward's boots. "And did she also send you to the Crown Granary by mistake?" Before Ambrose could answer, Samuel ran through the chapel doors, covered in mud. "The Crown Granary is open," he gasped. "Wagons are leaving through the north gate." "How many?" Frances asked. 6. 2 were heavily loaded. Percival turned on Ambrose. "Lavinia told me no grain would be moved until after the review." Ambrose's composure slipped. The transfer required speed. "What transfer?" Ambrose realized his error and said nothing. Percival ordered one constable to guard Elias and another to restrain the gunman. "Vale will ride with us," he said. "He is not to leave anyone's sight." It was not an arrest, but it was the first time Percival had treated Ambrose as a suspect. The chapel bells began ringing again. Fast, repeated, urgent, fire. A red glow spread above the trees in the direction of the Crown Granary. Frances ran for the horses. Percival followed, while two constables placed Ambrose between them and rode toward the estate. They found the blue warehouse doors burning. Villagers formed a bucket line, but flames had already reached the eastern roof. Two wagons were disappearing along the north road. Frances examined the tracks beside the gate. One set of wheels had cut deep into the wet earth. The other had barely marked it. "The shallow wagon is a decoy," she said. "The first carries the missing wheat." Percival ordered riders after it. Then a woman screamed from inside the granary. "Percival!" He froze. Lady Lavinia was trapped behind the burning blue doors, while the wagon carrying Ashbourne's harvest vanished into the darkness. Percival ran toward the burning doors. Frances caught his sleeve. "The roof above the entrance is already failing. Use the rear loading hatch." They circled the granary as villagers soaked blankets in the water trough. Percival broke the hatch lock with an iron bar, and smoke poured through the opening. Frances wrapped a wet blanket around her shoulders. "You are not going inside," Percival said. "You do not know the building." She entered before he could stop her. Lavinia lay near the weighing platform, coughing beneath a fallen beam. Percival followed Frances inside, and together they lifted the timber from her skirt. As they dragged her toward the hatch, Frances saw an open ledger beside the scales. Several pages had been torn out. A candle lay on the floor beside them. The fire had not started there, but Lavinia had been destroying records before it reached her. They escaped moments before part of the roof collapsed. Lavinia clung to Percival, trembling. "Ambrose locked me inside. He forced me to authorize the wagons." Frances removed the ring of brass keys from Lavinia's wrist. "You held every key to this building. The side door was barred from outside." That could be true. Ambrose might have decided Lavinia had become more useful as a dead victim than a living accomplice, but it did not explain the missing ledger pages. Percival had noticed them too. "What were you doing beside the accounts?" he asked. Lavinia's eyes moved toward the burning granary. "Trying to save them. By tearing out pages?" Her silence was brief, but long enough. A constable brought Ambrose forward. "Two riders escaped while we fought the fire." Percival faced his steward. "Did you lock Lady Lavinia inside?" "No, Your Grace. She ordered the records destroyed. When I refused, her own men attacked me." Lavinia pulled away from Percival. "He is lying." Both accused the other, and neither explanation accounted for the stolen wheat. Frances turned to the villagers. "Inspect the 5 remaining granaries. Take millers from each district as witnesses. Record every sack before anything is moved." The constable looked toward Percival for confirmation. He hesitated. That hesitation told Frances everything. Even now, with his storehouse burning and his steward exposed, Percival feared what a full inspection might reveal. "How much did Lavinia give you?" Frances asked. His face hardened. "This is neither the place nor the time. It became the place when you handed her my keys before the entire county." Lavinia answered for him. £40,000. The nearby farmers fell silent. Percival's political campaign had never required such a sum. Frances understood at once. Part had concealed debts he had hidden from her, while the remainder purchased the influence he believed would carry him into Parliament. In return, Lavinia had demanded control of the most valuable movable asset at Ashbourne, the winter grain. You promised her the granaries before you accused me, Frances said. I promised temporary management of property you had no right to transfer. Percival lowered his voice. If this becomes public, Ashbourne's creditors will descend before we recover a single sack. You want me to remain silent until I know the full truth. You knew enough to condemn me publicly. The words struck him, but he did not deny them. A rider returned from the North Road. The shallow wagon carried sand, he reported. The loaded wagon turned south beyond Belcross. We lost it near Blackmere Hill. Frances knew the road. A heavy wagon could not climb the northern slope. It would have to pass through the abandoned quarry, where the path narrowed between a stone wall and a steep drop. She selected 4 farmers who had worked with her during previous harvests. Bring rope, lanterns, and 2 empty carts. Percival stepped forward. I will lead the pursuit. The farmers did not move. Frances looked at him. They no longer trust your orders. His expression changed as he understood that the authority he had taken from her had not passed to Lavinia. It had simply left him. Frances mounted the nearest horse. Before she could ride, a constable emerged from the burning granary, carrying a scorched wooden box. Inside were copied seals, blank transfer forms, and letters bearing Frances's forged signature. Beneath them lay a sealed complaint addressed to the Crown. It accused Frances of stealing military grain and demanded her arrest at sunrise. At the bottom appeared the name of the principal witness, Duke Percival Hawthorne. Percival took the complaint from the constable. I signed a request for an audit, he said. Frances pointed to the final paragraph. You swore that I concealed grain and refused to produce my accounts. I was told those facts had been verified. You were told what you wanted to hear. A shout rose near the burning granary. Ambrose had cut the reins from a constable's horse and disappeared into the darkness. Frances looked toward the southern road. He is going after the loaded wagon. She mounted immediately. 4 farmers followed her, carrying rope and lanterns. Percival ordered 2 constables to ride with them. Frances did not object. If the missing grain was recovered, she needed witnesses who answered to neither Lavinia nor herself. They reached Blackmere Quarry less than an hour later. The wagon tracks curved exactly where Frances expected, avoiding the steep northern hill and entering the narrow quarry road. She sent 2 farmers through the woods, while the others rolled loose stones across the path. Soon, wheels groaned in the darkness. A heavily loaded wagon appeared between the limestone walls. Ambrose held the reins. 2 armed riders followed behind him. He stopped when he saw Frances blocking the road. Move aside. That wheat belongs to Ashbourne. It belongs to whoever possesses the documents. Ambrose raised a pistol. Before he could fire, the farmers emerged behind the wagon and startled the horses. The team reared, turning the wagon sideways. 1 wheel struck the stone barrier and cracked. Sacks spilled across the road. Frances cut one open. Clean wheat poured through her fingers. The stolen harvest. Ambrose fired. The ball struck the wall above Frances, showering her with stone fragments. Percival pulled her behind the barrier as the constables rushed forward. Ambrose seized one of the wagon horses, but a farmer caught its bridle. Surrounded and unable to escape, the steward lowered his weapon. Percival stepped toward him. You used my seal to steal military grain. Ambrose laughed bitterly. You gave me that seal. For estate business. You signed every paper Lady Lavinia placed before you. You never asked where her money came from because you needed it. Percival's face went still. Ambrose continued, She praised your judgment. Your wife questioned it. That was enough to make you choose the wrong woman. Take him. Percival ordered. The constables bound Ambrose's hands. Frances inspected the damaged wagon. Only half the sacks could be recovered before the broken axle collapsed. Even if every one proved sound, the shipment would not fulfill Ashbourne's military contract. "We need the other wagons," she said. Ambrose smiled. "You will never find them." Frances showed him the account page Elias had saved. "The warehouse code will lead me to them." For the first time, his confidence weakened. Percival moved closer to Frances. "I will withdraw the complaint and restore your authority tonight." "No." He stared at her. "You cannot privately return what you publicly took," she said. "The accusation was made before tenants, officials, and gentlemen whose approval you wanted. The correction will be made before them as well. I am trying to repair this. You are trying to stop the consequences from reaching you." He had no answer. Hooves approached from the northern road. A royal courier entered the quarry with 6 mounted officers. He carried a sealed warrant bearing the crown's mark. "Duchess Frances Hawthorne," he announced, "you are accused of diverting military grain and conspiring to defraud the crown." Percival stepped between them. "The accusation is false. We have recovered the stolen wheat." The courier examined the broken wagon, then handed him the warrant. "Your own sworn statement says otherwise, Your Grace." Percival broke the seal. The color drained from his face. The document did not merely repeat the allegations against Frances. It declared him the Crown's principal witness and summoned him to testify against his wife at 10 o'clock that morning. Percival read the summons twice. "I signed a complaint about irregular accounts," he said. "Lavinia told me it would begin an internal inquiry." The royal courier regarded him coldly. "You swore that Duchess Frances concealed grain, falsified inventories, and refused inspection." Percival could no longer claim the words were entirely unfamiliar. He had accused Frances of those same acts before the county council. He had simply chosen not to discover whether they were true. The courier turned to Frances. "You must accompany us." "I will," she replied, "after this wheat reaches the royal depot. The hearing begins in less than 5 hours. Then help us move it. These sacks are evidence, and Ashbourne's contract expires at noon." The courier examined the wagon, the false transfers, and Ambrose's bound hands. After a brief hesitation, he ordered 4 officers to assist the farmers. Percival moved beside Frances. "I will testify that I was deceived. That is not the whole truth. What more do you expect me to say? That I warned you, that you refused to inspect the stores, that you signed the accusation because removing me protected your bargain with Lavinia." His expression tightened. "That admission will destroy my political future. You destroyed my name to preserve it." The recovered wheat was transferred into smaller carts. Before they left Blackmere, Frances gathered the farmers, constables, and royal officers around the first wagon. Percival understood what she required. He faced them. "My wife did not steal this grain," he said. "She warned me that the inventories had been altered. I ignored her, transferred authority I did not possess, and signed the statement used against her." No one spoke. His confession did not restore their trust, but it created witnesses he could not later silence. They reached the royal depot shortly after sunrise. The quartermaster weighed and inspected every sack. "The wheat is sound," he announced, "but this is less than half the contracted amount." Ashbourne still faced a ruinous penalty unless Frances found the remaining stores before noon. Samuel arrived carrying a note from Reverend Hale. Elias had survived the night. Before the physician sedated him, he had remembered one additional detail. Every missing shipment was marked with a crown above the number 7. Frances opened the account page. Ashbourne possessed only 6 granaries, but the same symbol appeared beside 3 payments made to Crowe Agricultural Holdings. One payment covered river storage, another named a Red Bank toll collector. The third was dated for that morning and labeled Final Sale Commission. "Lavinia is not sending the grain to London," Frances said. "She is selling it before the Crown can seize it." Percival looked over her shoulder. "Where?" "The warehouse number is hidden in the symbol. Crown 7. Samuel produced another message. Lady Lavinia left Ashbourne in a closed carriage. The gatekeeper heard her order the driver toward Red Bank. The courier immediately called for horses. Frances stopped him. "If we storm the warehouse without proving the grain belongs to Ashbourne, Lavinia will claim I stored it there under my own forged orders. Then how do we prove ownership?" "Through the people who handled it." She sent Samuel to gather the Belcross toll collector. Thomas Pike would bring the millers who had marked the original sacks. The wagon drivers named on Elias's account page would be questioned separately. Percival reached for his coat. "I am coming with you. You will attend the hearing. I can help recover the grain. No, you can finally tell the court what you did." For once he did not argue. As Frances prepared to leave, the quartermaster brought her a printed notice found among the recovered sacks. It announced a private grain auction at Red Bank before noon. The seller was Crowe Agricultural Holdings. The quantity offered matched Ashbourne's missing reserve exactly. At the bottom, beneath the company's seal, appeared the name of the warehouse owner, Duchess Frances Hawthorne. Frances rode toward Red Bank with the royal courier and 2 officers. Thomas Pike followed with 3 millers who had marked Ashbourne's sacks after the harvest. Samuel brought the Belcross toll collector, while another officer escorted 2 wagon drivers named in Elias's accounts. They reached the Riverside district shortly before 9. Warehouse 7 stood apart from the main row of depots. A black crown had been painted above its doors, the same symbol Elias had described. Several merchant carriages waited outside. "The auction has already begun," Thomas said. Frances approached the entrance, but a clerk blocked her path. "This warehouse belongs to Duchess Frances Hawthorne. Entry is restricted to invited buyers." "I am Duchess Frances Hawthorne." The clerk's confidence vanished. Frances demanded the ownership papers. He produced a lease bearing her name, seal, and a convincing imitation of her signature. According to the document, she had rented the warehouse 3 months earlier, before any grain was reported missing. The courier examined it. "This supports the charge against you. It was designed to." Frances studied the lock. It was newer than the warehouse doors and bore the same maker's mark as the locks she had commissioned for Ashbourne. She removed the 6 brass keys from her reticule. The crown-marked key opened it. Lavinia had deliberately fitted the warehouse with a lock connected to Frances's granary system. If the authorities discovered the stolen wheat, the matching key would appear to prove Frances controlled both locations. The courier's suspicion deepened. "Your key opens the door. The lease bears your name. How do you explain that?" "I cannot, yet, but I can prove whose grain is inside." Frances opened the doors. Hundreds of sacks filled the warehouse. Merchants stood beside weighing scales, while an auctioneer called prices from a raised platform. At the far end, Lavinia watched from behind a desk. She showed no surprise. "Frances," she said, "how kind of you to attend your own sale." The auctioneer stopped speaking. Frances crossed to the nearest stack. Each district had used a different colored thread when closing its sacks. Blue belonged to Belcross. Red marked the river farms. Yellow identified the western fields. The threads were still present, though someone had cut away the estate labels. Thomas Pike opened one sack and pressed a handful of wheat between his palms. "This came through my mill," he said. "The grain was dried after the September rain. The split husks are unmistakable." Another miller identified wheat from the Western District by its darker color and smaller kernels. The toll collector stepped forward. "I recorded 12 Ashbourne wagons entering Red Bank over 3 nights. Mr. Vale's men paid every fee." One of the drivers removed his cap. "We were told Duchess Frances had ordered the transfer." "Who gave you the written orders?" the courier asked. "Mr. Vale." "And who paid you?" "Crowe Agricultural Holdings." The courier turned toward Lavinia. She remained calm. Employees often pay expenses on behalf of their clients. Frances owns the warehouse. Her key opened it. Her signature appears on every order. Frances examined the auction ledger. The first lots had been priced at nearly 4 times the normal winter rate. Lavinia intended to create a shortage, then sell Ashbourne its own grain through intermediaries. "You planned to bankrupt the estate and purchase its farmland," Frances said. "I planned nothing." "Your accusations will not erase the documents." Lavinia placed a second paper on the desk. It was a letter addressed to Crowe Agricultural Holdings. The writer instructed the company to remove grain from Ashbourne, store it at Crown 7, and conduct the sale before noon. The signature belonged to Frances. Beneath it appeared a detailed list of the 6 granaries, including their exact inventories, information only Frances, Percival, and the estate steward should have possessed. Then Lavinia revealed the final page. It contained a handwritten note from Percival. "My wife must not learn of this arrangement until the grain has been moved." Frances read Percival's note again. The handwriting was genuine. He had known grain would be moved and had deliberately concealed the arrangement from her. Whether he understood Lavinia's entire plan no longer mattered. His secrecy had given the conspiracy access to Ashbourne's stores. Lavinia addressed the courier. His Grace authorized the transfer. His wife provided the inventories. Crowe Agricultural Holdings merely followed their instructions. Frances laid the forged letter beside Elias's account page. "If I ordered this sale, why did your company pay Ambrose Vale, the wagon drivers, and the warehouse rent? To protect your identity." "And why replace the missing wheat with sand?" Lavinia's smile weakened. Frances called the auctioneer forward. "Who hired you?" The man glanced toward Lavinia. "Crowe Agricultural Holdings." "Who instructed you to sell the grain before noon?" "Lady Crowe." "Did you ever meet or correspond with me?" "No, Your Grace." The warehouse clerk gave the same answer. Lavinia had delivered the lease, ordered the new lock installed, and provided every document bearing Frances's name. Then Thomas Pike opened 3 more sacks. Beneath the removed estate labels, each still carried a small miller's mark stitched into the lower seam. Those symbols matched the original Ashbourne inventory Frances had completed 4 days earlier. The courier examined the evidence. The grain clearly came from Ashbourne. That does not prove Duchess Frances did not order its removal. "No," Frances said, "but the weights do." She opened the auction ledger. Every lot had been listed at its weight before transport. Grain normally lost a small amount during handling, yet the figures matched Frances's original inventory exactly, down to the final pound. "These numbers were copied," she explained. "No one weighed the sacks after they arrived." The courier compared the ledger with Elias's records. Frances was right. Lavinia had copied the estate inventory to make the false documents convincing, but the perfect figures exposed the fraud. One of the wagon drivers stepped forward. "Mr. Vale ordered us not to use the public scales. Lady Crowe said the Duchess's inventory would be sufficient." Every merchant in the warehouse heard him. The courier ordered the auction suspended and placed the grain under Crown protection. Lavinia's composure finally broke. "You have no authority to seize my company's property. Then produce proof that your company purchased it," Frances said. Lavinia seized the auction ledger and threw it toward a brazier near the desk. Frances caught one edge before it reached the coals. Lavinia pulled the other, tearing the binding between them. Loose pages scattered across the floor. The royal officers restrained her. Samuel and the millers gathered the fallen records before anyone could destroy them. Among the pages was a list of payments to officials, warehouse clerks, and men hired to move condemned army grain into Ashbourne's stores. A final entry revealed Lavinia's intended profit. Once the estate failed its contract and its creditors demanded payment, Crowe Agricultural Holdings would purchase 3 farms at a fraction of their value. The stolen wheat would then be sold back to the county at 4 times the normal price. "You created the shortage you intended to profit from," Frances said. Lavinia looked toward the merchants surrounding her and understood that the evidence was no longer hidden in private papers. Too many independent witnesses had seen the grain, the forged lease, and her attempt to burn the ledger. The courier placed her under arrest. By the time Frances reached the county courthouse, the missing wheat was already being loaded for return to Ashbourne. The hearing chamber was crowded with tenants, merchants, royal officers, and county gentlemen. Percival stood alone before the magistrate. The Crown withdrew every charge against Frances, but the prosecutor had not finished. Evidence recovered at Red Bank proves that Lady Lavinia Crowe organized the theft and fraudulent sale. It also shows that Duke Percival Hawthorne knowingly concealed a financial agreement involving the granaries. Percival looked at Frances as she entered. Lavinia's solicitor rose and presented another document. It was not forged. 6 weeks before Frances was accused, Percival had promised Lavinia unrestricted management of every Ashbourne granary in exchange for £40,000. The magistrate turned toward him. "Your Grace, did you intend to remove your wife before any evidence of misconduct existed?" Percival looked at the letter, then at the woman whose reputation he had sacrificed to conceal it. "Yes," he said. The courtroom fell silent after Percival's admission. Frances looked at the letter in his hand. "You had already promised Lavinia my granaries," she said. "The accusation only gave you a reason to remove me." Percival did not attempt to deny it. "I owed more than I could repay." Lavinia offered £40,000 and promised to support my campaign. When you questioned the missing grain, I told myself you were undermining me. You knew I might discover your agreement. Yes, and believing me guilty was more convenient than admitting what you had done. His voice dropped. "Yes." The magistrate ordered Lavinia brought forward. Her solicitor argued that Percival had willingly given her control, but Frances placed the Red Bank records before the court. Payments from Crowe Agricultural Holdings to Ambrose. The false warehouse lease in Frances's name. The auction ledger showing grain priced at 4 times its normal value. The wagon accounts linking the stolen sacks to Ashbourne. The list of farms Lavinia intended to purchase after the estate failed. Thomas Pike and the other millers identified their marks on the recovered sacks. The toll collector confirmed the secret wagons. The warehouse clerk testified that Lavinia had personally delivered the forged lease and ordered the matching lock installed. Finally, Elias Ward was carried into the courtroom on a stretcher. He testified that Lavinia had ordered Ambrose to replace Ashbourne's wheat with sand and condemned army grain. She had planned to trigger the military penalty, force the sale of the estate's unentailed farms, and resell the stolen harvest during the shortage. Ambrose, facing charges of attempted murder and arson, confirmed the arrangement. Lavinia's defense collapsed. The magistrate ordered her and Ambrose held for trial on charges of fraud, forgery, theft of military supplies, arson, attempted murder, and conspiracy to defraud the crown. Then the prosecutor turned toward Percival. "You may not have known the full scheme, Your Grace, but you gave Lady Crowe access to the granaries, your seal, and the authority she used. You signed an accusation against your wife without verifying a single claim." Percival's solicitor rose, but Percival stopped him. "I will not defend myself by pretending I was merely deceived." He faced the crowded gallery. "Frances warned me. I refused to inspect the stores because I feared losing Lavinia's money. I publicly called my wife dishonest because her competence exposed my own failures." His gaze found Frances. "Lady Lavinia exploited my pride. She did not create it. The decision to condemn an innocent woman was mine." No one applauded him. The confession was necessary, but it did not erase the harm. The Crown formally withdrew every charge against Frances and ordered public corrections sent to the same county officials who had received Percival's complaint. Frances then presented her marriage settlement. The granaries were rebuilt with my separate funds. Their management was secured to me unless a court established misconduct. The magistrate examined the clause. No court issued such a judgment. His Grace therefore had no legal authority to transfer their management. He ordered the 6 brass keys returned to Frances. As she closed her hand around them, a murmur of approval moved through the gallery. The same farmers who had watched Percival strip away her authority now watched a court restore what had always been hers. But the Crown's representative had one final announcement. Although the grain has been recovered, Duke Percival's conduct made the royal contract insecure. Effective immediately, the Crown suspends Ashbourne's military agreement and places the estate accounts under independent review. Percival lost his parliamentary sponsorship before leaving the courtroom. His creditors were granted permission to examine the debts he had concealed. Outside, villagers crowded the square as wagons carried the recovered wheat back toward Ashbourne. Thomas Pike handed Frances the final inspection report. The grain would feed the county through winter, but the burned Crown granary had to be rebuilt. The mills required repairs, and Percival's legitimate debts remained unpaid. Without the military contract, Ashbourne could not meet those costs. Percival read the figures. "I will sell the London house and the racehorses." "It may not be enough," Thomas said. Frances looked at the farmers whose land would be threatened if the estate failed. Then she looked at the 6 keys in her hand. "The granaries saved Ashbourne once," she said. "Now they must be placed beyond the reach of every future duke, including my husband." Percival understood what she intended. To protect the tenants, he would have to surrender permanent control over the system his family had ruled for generations. Percival signed the trust deed 3 days later. The 6 granaries, their reserve funds, and the farmland Frances had purchased with her separate money were placed under a permanent board. Frances would serve as its first director alongside elected representatives from the tenant farms and mills. No future duke could sell the winter reserves, borrow against them, or transfer their management for personal debt. Percival surrendered every claim without attaching a condition to it. He sold his London residence, racehorses, and several paintings inherited outside the estate settlement. The proceeds paid the legitimate creditors, repaired the lower mill, and began rebuilding the burned Crown granary. None of Frances's property was used to repay his debts. Lavinia's conspiracy unraveled during the following weeks. Her company records confirmed that she had stolen Ashbourne's grain, filled its stores with sand and condemned army wheat, and planned to acquire the tenant farms after engineering the estate's failure. Her remaining property was seized to compensate the Crown and the families harmed by the scheme. Ambrose received a long prison sentence for fraud, arson, attempted murder, and theft of military supplies. Lavinia was convicted of the same central offenses, as well as organizing the conspiracy. Percival was not convicted as her accomplice. The evidence showed that he had not known about the false grain or the fire. But ignorance did not free him from consequence. The Crown permanently cancelled Ashbourne's military contract, barred him from seeking a parliamentary seat, and kept the estate accounts under independent supervision. His public standing collapsed, and the men whose approval he had pursued stopped answering his letters. Then Percival summoned the same county council before which he had condemned Frances. Farmers, millers, village elders, servants, and county gentlemen once again filled the great hall. The 6 brass keys lay on the table before Frances's chair. Percival stood alone at the head of the room. "I accused Duchess Frances of concealing grain and defrauding Ashbourne," he began. Both accusations were false. He did not blame Lavinia for deceiving him. He named each decision as his own. He had hidden his debts. He had promised away property he did not control. He had ignored Frances's warnings, signed allegations without investigating them, and used her competence as a reason to resent her. "I removed my wife because she was close to discovering the truth," he said. Lady Lavinia exploited that choice. She did not make it for me. Before the same witnesses who had watched him give Frances's keys away, Percival restored her name and acknowledged that her authority had never lawfully belonged to him. He placed his signet ring beside the keys. "I relinquish all control over Ashbourne's grain system. Duchess Frances owes me neither forgiveness nor reconciliation in return." Silence followed. Then Frances approached the table. She took the keys. She left the ring. During the winter, the recovered wheat returned to its proper districts. Frances introduced public monthly inventories, separate locks supervised by millers and tenant representatives, and written limits preventing emergency reserves from being used for speculation. Elias became chief auditor after recovering from his wound. Thomas Pike supervised the repaired mills. Samuel received a place at the county school, though he still returned home each weekend to help his father. No Ashbourne family went without bread. Percival remained at the main house under financial supervision. Frances moved into the dower house on land protected by her settlement. They met only when estate business required it. He never asked her to conceal what he had done. By early spring, the rebuilt Crown Granary was ready to open. The evening before the ceremony, Percival came to the dower house carrying the final receipt for his personal debts. "I once believed regret entitled me to another chance," he said. "Now I understand it entitles me only to repair what I can." Frances studied the man she had once trusted. He had begun to change. He had accepted disgrace without demanding comfort from her. But change did not erase the night he sacrificed her reputation to protect his ambition. "I believe you are sorry," she said. Hope appeared in his eyes, restrained but unmistakable. "But I will not return to the marriage we had." He lowered his head. "I understand. If anything new is ever built between us, it will not begin with your title, your authority, or my forgiveness. It will begin only if I choose it." Percival accepted the boundary and left without asking for a promise. At dawn, Frances stood before the rebuilt Crown Granary. Stone partitions divided the interior, and 2 elected tenants waited beside her with their own keys. 6 months earlier, Percival had taken those keys from her before a silent crowd. Now Frances fitted the crown-marked key into the new lock. The doors opened. Golden wheat filled the storehouse from floor to rafters. Beyond it, the village bells began to ring, not for hunger, fire, or warning, but because the first spring bread was ready. Frances stepped inside, and the doors remained open behind her.